Hello, everyone. Can you hear me good? Awesome, because I can't hear you. So this is probably a little bit awkward. Maybe it's your first time listening to a deaf presenter. At the same time, you have the privilege to hear my voice. I'm assuming it's clear. Just so you're aware that as a deaf presenter, my eyes are everything. On top of that, I also have low vision. So the minimizing of distraction helps me stay focused and know what's going on. I will rely on the ASL interpreter. Deaf interpreter will translate all potential questions, conversation when needed. But for the first beginning part, it's important that you're aware that even though I speak very well, and I want you to have what I would call full access to understanding me, I myself will always be deaf, regardless of my voice ability. So I do have a need to rely on a cell interpreter. And there will be times of gaps between another interpreter you don't see who is hearing everything and providing the interpretation to the deaf interpreter, and the deaf interpreter is giving me full access. So it may be a little awkward with timing and pauses that you're not comfortable or familiar with. So bear with me if you can. Anyway, hello. Welcome to my presentation. If you notice the title of my presentation, it's about trauma and how potential members who come to your circles and participate in the facilitation process for constant making decisions, policy. We all know how the system of Sociocracy works, I hope. And that process, often than not, can be overlapped or have barriers to other members fully participating, like myself. And so my experience with trauma is not necessarily something horrific happened to me or a current or recent accident or anything, but the trauma I'm talking about will be impacted with what all of our members bring to the table or our circles. And we don't see them because they're internal trauma that maybe we have the lack of accessibility. Maybe we don't have opportunities to communicate effectively, or maybe we have disabilities or limitations that prevent us from fully appreciating what's going on in our circles. So, as facilitators, it's important that you get some understanding that maybe preconditions or setups are necessary for us to ensure that all members who participate in the facilitation process are not struggling internally. And for an example, many of us maybe already experienced, we have some members who maybe derail the process of the facilitation. Maybe some unintentionally sabotage the process, and maybe some look withdrawn or aloof because they don't understand their role, or if they come from an ingenious background like myself, we normally don't engage our opinion until we are asked to. So we have a lot of members in the deaf spaces that come with different kinds of trauma. That word trauma, perhaps a better word would be come with vulnerability. And I think if we can be comfortable with vulnerability, I think it really straightens the bond and it opens opportunities for us to have deeper connection and allow for better understanding with all of our members in the Sociocracy process.
Sociocracy
So
process.
that's my topic today for you is what was my experience not only as a participant, but at the same time as a facilitator myself in the last few years and with my recent training last year with SOFA, Sociocracy for All. I will want to start with you understanding something that I would share that really impacted the limitation of participation as a deaf person, whether it's my identity, race, disability, and simple marginalizations and oppression that I have every day, and the demands and the burdens for trying to screen through them so that I can run a facilitation meeting using Sociocracy and ensuring all my members also can feel comfortable and participate as much as possible. I want to share with you some of that, what I call intersectionality of different individual situations, how we socially interact with each other, and what kinds of communication factors, barriers that impede on the individuals who are deaf, plus maybe black and brown, indigenous, person of color, plus have low vision, plus. Many of you probably are seeing more often than not that people have a multiple social identities when we bring them to our tables or we encourage them to become proactive participants in our facilitation process. But if they are coming with layers of different traumatized experiences or marginalization, it is difficult for those members to really actively participate. And that's where many of us facilitators become frustrated or feel we are delaying so much of our process to get through a facilitation. Many different factors we don't think about. Why we like to think that all people come and participate in our circle are good people and we're all on the same page and we all are able to park or leave our differences and limitations at the door while we participate in any facilitation process. But in reality, that doesn't happen. I'm sure some of you already experienced that frustration of why is it taking so long for us to arrive to consent or make decisions? Why are some people showing up in our circle then quietly disappear after a few sessions and so on? So I want to start with a question for you. This question is not necessarily asking you to respond or to have an answer, but I want you to think about this question as I go through the rest of my presentation. And the next slide, please, Ted. What should facilitators know about how hidden trauma of their members impact participation? Okay. Remember, we don't always disclose our limitation, our trauma. A lot of that is because society in general, we are conditioned not to display vulnerability in the face of people. But once you have a vulnerability like death, or the inability to see, or the inability to physically participate in something, you have no choice. Now, vulnerability doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. And clearly, we don't want to put that screening for vulnerability on an individual, because Sociocracy says we all have equal opportunity to voice our questions, ideas, concerns, to be seen and to be heard. But truth of it, for many of us who have a multiple identities and vulnerabilities, it doesn't always have a smooth process to participate. And I believe it's okay. Perhaps the term vulnerability is good coming from a facilitator. Why it gives credence to people that it's okay to be open and vulnerable, and it creates an opportunity to develop those deeper connections with our members and an understanding. I'm just as vulnerable as you are. And together, through all of our vulnerability, we can succeed with the facilitation process. Really gives a whole lot of weight off for many of us. So I want to start with both my own experience in as a participant in a Socratic process, and also give you in the end some tools and resources that I found to be very effective, not just for deaf only, but for multiple different intersectionality types of barriers that people may bring to your table and your circle. So the next slide, please. The term that you see on this slide, BIPOC, I want to clarify and expand what that means and my intention for why I use that term. BIPOC simply is Black and Brown Indigenous people of color. And why that's so important that I use, because the intention is to address and make visible the most marginalized, oppressed people, such as people who are deaf, plus a person of color, or people who have disabilities, plus other factors that impact them as a person of color. So people who have multiple identities and different vulnerabilities, it's hard to know which hat you are using when you're participating in any kind of meeting or a facilitation process. Listen, for myself, I'm deaf. I'm a member of a Latina group. I'm also a member of the LGBTQ community. I also have low vision. I also have a lot of experience of oppression and marginalization. In general, society's view of deaf people and people with disability isn't always a positive experience growing up and as an adult and as a leader. So my style of feeling I belong and I can participate has really needing to have that empathetic, visual, touching kind of learning experience as a participant. Okay? Empathetic, that kind of learner really is the ability to not just say, oh, I understand your need. It's not a verbal understanding or sympathy or whatever. It really has to be something that's proactive. For example, if you are aware of any of your members who have some limitations or low vision, why not do we establish ahead of time visual materials that are enlarged or needing font color differences for low vision or deafblind, there are many things we can do ahead of time instead of waiting until they show up and a crisis happens. Right? So having empathetic understanding means that we take action ahead of time to minimize any possibility of having bears or having to hold up a meeting because of vulnerabilities that are popping up with some of the members in our circles. Mm. I myself, how I feel I belong because I rely on my eyes is that 80% of my connection and understanding with people is nonverbal. So if you are expressing yourself or you're sitting in a specific type of stature or posture, or if you cross your arms, or if you don't give me direct eye contact because I rely on it, it's going to impact my feeling of belonging and then impact my desire to participate in your meeting. So sometimes we have to realize that simple things we take for granted or normally do out of habit can be a trigger or a vulnerability for somebody else. Visual learners, clearly my eyes are everything, my eyes are my ears. And I need to see not just the empathetic, nonverbal behavior of people, but I also need to see visual graphics. I need to see pictures. I need to see how the pictures and the information connect with each other. Often people think, well, if we just give a printed version of our slides or our graphics or a verbatim visually seen and read, that that's good enough. Not with a lot of us who are deaf and who also have low vision and many things that will impact. We need to see how you process your understanding and information that is printed. So sometimes simple pictures and simple use of a diagram in showing an idea coming to a result or a haha moment visually makes me feel more at ease and feel more in control internally that I can participate and even raise my hand and share a response. And on the other hand, kinesthetic learners, we really need to be involved in actual practice or an actual opportunity to observe and experience things that are going on in order to grasp a concept. So the things that many of you maybe do on a daily basis, whether you talk and whether you share printed material, there's an assumption that the internal processing is the same because we're all humans. But the reality is many humans, they have different ways of how they process information. And if you don't understand your own members on how they process information, you're often going to be facilitating sororic circles on a hit or miss basis. So those are the things that really impacted my experience as a participant. And now the next slide, I'll talk about what is expected of facilitators. For those of you who already experienced facilitating with your members, clearly there are steps that we go through that succeed through the Socratic facilitation process. I just highlighted some pictures that many of us were trained in and learned to prepare on how to get through each of the steps of the process. When you look at forming or helping circles and subcircles, that really is the biggest important one because you have to know who you are inviting as members of those circles and also how much do you know your members vulnerabilities and limitations. So how do you do that without providing therapy or interfering with that natural process of forming your subcircles and groups? One of the things that we learned in my work at Diversity Academy for Interpreters, that's an organization that provides online courses, training, and workshops specifically for interpreters on how to unpack their privileges and or how to incorporate anti-racist work in their work in the interpreting profession. So we already have some way of giving our members opportunity to feel okay about being vulnerable. For example, we use a lot of imagery. I'm not saying that word right,
Imagery.
but there are symbols and pictures like thumbs up, not okay, not good, or faces, smile, or so that we give not only a symbolic way to express some of the vulnerability, but also to have an empathetic understanding that you will be surprised how many members are struggling in forming and being in the circles. So we want to give people ways that they can visually showcase whatever they are feeling in the moment. Often we call that checking in. Right? But if you've got members who, when you check in and they override that 5 minutes with confessions of their everyday crisis and life experiences, it can make it a difficult process to get beyond that to even start your meeting. So it's so important that you give opportunities of your members before you form your circle, some kind of screening and some kind of experience of what exactly it means to be a member of a circle and what that process not only looks like, but what it will feel like. So people know there's a limit, meaning 5 minutes. When you say 5 minutes, maybe as a hearing person, people get a gut understanding that that's quick and short. But when you tell deaf people 5 minutes, they think that means 2 or 3 hours because deaf people don't normally get to the point. They often have some kind of personal story associated with a question or a thought. So it's so important to know how you can prepare your members what it means to go through that Socratic process for establishing circles and welcoming everyone. Right? Of course, you will hopefully have established policy, rules, and ways to interact with each other. At the same time, you also have to have some kind of experience with giving members a way to get out of something that's internally triggering them. Maybe our choice of a word, maybe that's something that they experience traumatically, or maybe our boundaries, they're not familiar with strict or more structured boundaries. In the deaf spaces, our boundaries are different in a way that we allow each other to be vulnerable, to pay attention and listen to the stories and respect that time. So it's important that members get some kind of pre-experience and training of what it means to get through that process, facilitating or as a participant. Then you have what is called the facilitation, the consent process for getting to an agreement. or making a decision. And this is where is the hugest struggle that I had both as a participant and as a facilitator. Why? A lot of the way we do and make decisions, whether democratic or not, or Socratic or not, is that many members come in with the mindset with the traditional authoritative way of approaching certain structures that often don't always fit with those that come with traumatized identities and how they will participate or not or make decisions. In our situation, deaf spaces with multiple identities, intersectionalities, and vulnerabilities, it was a real struggle to come to a consensus of what we would do and achieve. So it's so important that we have opportunities, what we call rounds of understanding. That has to be a part of that process. If you have 1 hour and you expect to come to a decision or consensus agreement in an
Consensus.
hour, you have to make that very clear that here's the time, and by this specific time, we need to come to an agreement. And how the members in that circle appreciate that process has to be clearly established. If you just assume people look at the time and say, okay, we have to come to a decision, it can be a forced decision that will trigger some people who feel they had no say about the decisions being made. Right? Then, when that happens, you get a multitude of objections. Now, we are trained on how to handle objections. But one of the things I've learned in deaf spaces is that it's really not about objection. It's really about clarity, clarification. And so when people object, we have to make that clarified. Are you objecting to this decision or are you asking for a clarification? Which? And deaf spaces people feel better because they're like, oh, I'm not objecting to the decision. No, I just wanted to know more, or I would prefer more expansion on why this. Because if you've pre set your steps and gone through the appropriate process for consent or agreement, then there's really no need to further expand. You just need to help the person get back to what is being asked for making a decision or agreement. And then you give them opportunity to say, if you don't mind, we'll have someone later or outside of this meeting, we'd be happy to clarify and expand more. And I found that very effective because it reduced a lot of our delays in making decision and agreement by half of the time. Why does that happen with people who come from a place of trauma? I have to say is that often I see our members never having the privilege to participate in these kinds of dialogue and decision making process since birth to grown up adult. Why people often make decisions for us without us. So we are brainwashed or we have this internal assumption that we're not good enough to understand things. So we don't do things because we understand. We do things because we're told. Socratic process is the opposite of that. We want to be sure that all people understand the process and why we arrive to a consent or agreement of something. Important to think about that. And now, if you look at the last two green ones, that handling disagreement with care and strategies for better listening. If you have members who are coming from a place of trauma, those two steps of the process will be the most impacted, because my perspective lens of what caring means and how I listen may be very different from the next person who's sitting next to me in that circle. So, what do? We provide options, maximum 3 or 4 options that we give members to pick on what ways they will understand and listen. We all agreed to that well before we have a meeting. And then if someone gets off track or someone derailing the process, we point to the floor, bring them up visually, and they see, oh, and we ask them, which one are you using? And then that makes them realize that they're getting off without directly telling them, why are you derailing this process? Why are you sabotaging our ability to make a decision? It's much more effective when we do that, because we remember that we all have some kind of vulnerability that impacts our appreciation of other people than our own. The next slide. So in deaf spaces with multiple identities and vulnerabilities that arise, we look at these four for understanding the Socratic facilitation process. How facilitators handle the agreement process, they must have training, not just with Sociocracy, but training with how they incorporate and make other members feel included who are not coming from our place of privilege or understanding. We have to give options for people so that they know what that facilitation looks like when an agreement is going to begin, or that process. Many of our members really appreciated that we had opportunities during our meetings for checking in for understanding. Now, the word understanding is a big word that can often throw off the process, because understanding means we have to have personal stories attached to it. So we will warn that the members, when you say if you understand, we want to see 1 or 2 words, and we use what is called a word cloud. And people personally can just click word cloud of what they understood. And visually, we see, wow, we all understanding, that's pretty good. Or, wow, not just me, but other people are off, they don't understand. So it gives us a direct point to make sure we get the most or majority for understanding. When we ask for clarifications, this is critical, because remember, my experience as a deaf participant is that I didn't always have the right tools for asking for clarification. And many deaf members on my team, in my circle, also didn't have a lot of lived experience seeing how other people make clarifications. So we started to develop through this process different ways our members make clarification. And then we made it visual so that people can see different ways you can ask or do clarification that is most understandable for most of the people, members on the team. Mm. how we handle disagreements with options. Some of you facilitators probably already know it's so hard to convince people to stay on task sometimes. And it's so hard for people to understand that you can have a disagreement, but it doesn't always necessarily mean it's going to go your way. So what we do is that we give very specific options that are common among our deaf spaces, and people will look at those options. For example, we maybe say you can ask for a check-in for understanding. You can ask to close and leave for a moment, maybe calm down, get filled, and then come back with no judgment. That's important, no judgment. And third, you can ask the non-violent communicator who's assigned it for that day and that meeting to have an outside conversation about the issue after the meeting. Or you can use the chat feature to type your concern and question. Then after the meeting, we assign one or two people to respond to any questions in the chat feature. Allowed us to continue the process with our facilitation with very minimal disruptions. And now, once you get through all that muck of disagreements, it's good to allow people and members to see what strategies were most effective, because they can then look at those and say, I think I like some of these and I will use it for my opportunities for other meetings or groups. Next slide, please. My conclusion really is you want both and multiple different things visually, and using an empathetic approach for getting better meeting results really helps the most vulnerable of our members to get through that facilitation process much more effectively. And to able to provide those different visual strategies or avenues for tools and resources. There are so many different ways we can present visual material that doesn't eat a lot of our time. Now with artificial intelligence, AI, we can even do that much better and faster. At the end of this 1 minute or two, I will be happy to give you some tools and resources that we found effective with members who have come from a place of trauma, vulnerability, so that you have something you can leave with that you can check out and see how they work. Bottom line is that we really need to take the time to get to know our members. And the more we can make it visual for all people to see what are the skills, the talent, vulnerability, and different things that impact a person's participation in circles and handling facilitation process, the better and the less people feel that they have to park everything that they bring within themselves as a person and what they struggle, because they see other people have the same issues, or they see how other people understand and handle their differences. I really want to give you the opportunity to take time to ask me questions and things that might be of curiosity to you. So my last slide is really, we want members not only to be more engaging and proactive in the collaboration of working together during any circle or facilitation process, but also that they can take risk in a positive way is really the ultimate goal of any circles facilitation meeting and process. Okay, I hope that you have some questions, and now would like to open chat feature for any question and give the interpreter a few seconds to hear your question or spotlight you so that I can see your beautiful face, who you are. And if not, use the chat feature either way, and then allow the interpreter to sign your verbatim back to me. Okay, Ted.
Questions in the chat. And ideally, if you have a question, raise your hand, turn your video on. I will spotlight you, and then we will see what you've got. Kate. You need your, there we go. Go ahead.
Hi, thank
Hello,
you,
everyone. Hello, beautiful people.
I observed that you are articulate.
Any questions?
There is a question here, Kate, for you. Suze, for you, from Kate.
Yeah, I observed that you're articulate about how to optimize your participation in a meeting. I'm wondering what suggestions you would have for a facilitator who is working with a group and perhaps one or more participants aren't as articulate or aren't able to express what they need to be included in the meeting. So I'm wondering if you have suggestions for the facilitator in those cases.
One of the things I did, and I can only speak from my experience as a facilitator, is that I asked people to share scenarios where they felt most vulnerable or frustrated because they couldn't participate in a meeting of any kind. And then we voted on the top 3 that we would practice with or play with. People really felt more comfortable with mock practices instead of actual revealing a trauma experience, because they have opportunities to sit back and observe how people take the role playing and how people behave, and then how it was successfully with the results. So that's very helpful. And you have these opportunities for practice a few times. For an example, if you know you need to establish your circles for facilitation process, you may say 2 weeks or a month before that meeting that you'll have some mock opportunities for anyone who wants to join and practice those different scenarios and then go through that process.
Thank you.
Michael.
Hello. My question relates to the...
Maybe?
Yes, there's a question to you from Michael.
My question is, at the end, you mentioned that visuals could be helpful for meeting facilitation. Do you have any examples of visuals that you could show or describe that would be helpful?
Yes. Yeah. There are several examples. One, you can have your materials in advance, any written materials in advance, adapted in a visual graphic way. where there are pictures with words and minimize all of that English jargon.
Jargon.
And during the actual Zoom meeting, we used a lot of those Zoom imagery, thumbs up pictures and things. At the same time, you can incorporate Slido in your Zoom where you can have very specific questions with the options of faces or different emotions that
Emojis.
people will see the percentage of how many people feel that. That's very helpful. And you can use word clouds that will show up with everybody on their text on their phone, can share a word or two, and then they can see that build up. And they can see the most common word, or even with faces, get bigger and bigger. And that's when you start to feel like, wow, I'm not alone. Other people feel the same. People are having a good day too, and things like that. That's very helpful. When you provide transcriptions with the captions clearly in the Zoom, you always want to have the captions on. One thing I learned, I do not ask someone who wants it. Why? Because it can be a trigger or it can demean that person. So we automatically, proactively do things in place. For myself and other members who are deafblind, who have low vision, we automatically have things that we ask all members to change the color of their fonts to yellow or blue because we, today's meeting, have some low vision people. One of the things that I avoid is saying you need this or they need that. Instead, I use we because we all own it and need to feel belong. That and vulnerability is present. We all own that vulnerability. And it makes people feel more at ease.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming and listening. I hope you've learned something. I know I didn't put my way to reach me, but I'm assuming Ted will give us presenters a way to be reached. Hopefully, some of you will reach out to me individually for any needs, online training, workshops, or whatever that might benefit you.